Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, activists, government leaders. We speak with each one to one. I'm pleased to welcome Frances Hesselbein to the program today. Anyone who's been a Girl Scout and anyone who's read any of her 27 books has probably been changed for the better. Her latest, My Life in Leadership, The Journey and Lessons Learned Along the Way, has just been published by the Josie Bass imprint of Wiley. In it, she charts her own path to personal success and to the honing of amazing leadership skills, from her small-town roots in Pennsylvania to boardrooms around the world. And as you'll realize immediately, her energy is boundless. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Sheryl.
Now, you're recognized as one of the leading experts on leadership. You've advised the heads of states, heads of corporations and nonprofits, army generals all over the world. And yet you write that the greatest influence in your life was your grandmother.
Yes.
Tell us why.
My grandmother taught me, when I was 8 years old, taught me respect for all people in the most beautiful way, and has had the greatest, she and my father had the greatest influence upon my life. I can't tell you the whole story of Mr. Yi and his vases, but there is a story that when I was 8 years old, I wanted to play with these beautiful ancient Chinese vases that were on a shelf above the pipe organ keys. And a Chinese laundryman lived in that little town of South Fork for 10 years. He was going back to China. It wouldn't let him bring his wife and children. He missed them too much, so he was leaving. All he brought with him were the two Chinese vases, ancient and beautiful, and he handed them to my grandmother wrapped in newspaper. When she said, "Oh, Mr. Yi, I couldn't accept these. They're far too valuable." And he said, "I want you to have them." And she said, "Why?" He said, "I have been in this town for 10 years, and you are the only person who ever called me Mr. Yi." I cried my heart out, but that was the moment, the defining moment, when I learned respect for all people from my grandmother.
And you said she was a great listener as well. And is that an attribute of a great leader?
Yes.
That he or she listens?
Listens, looks into your eyes, and as she listens, there's no one else. Concentration, listening, responding.
Your father died when you were a teenager. How did that change the course of your life?
It made me appreciate that we're called to accept responsibility. Even at 17, when I had the offer from my aunt to live with them, go to Swarthmore, come back when I finished and bring the family together again, I felt, my father would want me to keep our family together. I had been in junior college for 6 weeks.
So you dropped out of school and you went to work?
No, I went to school nights and weekends for many, many years. The junior college did have classes at night, and yes, I studied, but I worked, and I kept my little brother and sister and my mother all together.
It's interesting to me that you have accomplished all of the things that you have accomplished without ever getting a college degree. I mean, but then so did Bill Gates and I think Steve Jobs. What does that say about the connection or lack of one between becoming a leader and finishing college?
Well, you can finish college without a degree. You can take classes, and sometimes they even let you take graduate classes. They make an exception. It isn't the degree, it's the learning that takes place. And so I don't have a degree, but I had a very rich education.
And you got a lot of honorary doctorate degrees. How many?
Only 20, but
Only 20.
soon I will have number 21.
Okay. Tell us how, as a young mother, two children, one child? One child.
One little boy.
You becoming a Girl Scout troop leader started you on the path towards where you are today. Tell us about that.
Well, my little boy was 8 years old, and there was this horrible neighborhood chairman who kept pursuing me, wanting me to take a Girl Scout troop. And I kept saying to her, I'm sorry, I know nothing about little girls. I'm a mother of a little boy, and I refused until one day she caught me walking down our street with a sad story of 30 little 10-year-old Girl Scouts in the basement of Second Presbyterian Church.
With no troop leader.
They had to disband because they lost their leader. So it was a weak moment. I said, I'll take them for 6 weeks until we find a real leader. We stayed together for the next 8 years till they all were graduated from
So you
high
went
school.
from troop leader and then what to the local council?
President, chairman of the council, and world committees that met in Switzerland and London, and then on the national board of directors, where I chaired the national program committee, and doors opened. I never tried to open one, but they just opened, and you walk through,
Right.
and then another door opens.
Right.
And then one day I had a call from New York. We want you to come and talk to us about the CEO position. Well, if in 67 years they had never had anyone from within, I knew they weren't serious. My husband thought it was the greatest idea in the world. He was a filmmaker and loved New York. I said, I'm writing a polite note, but I'm not going for the interview. And he said, I'm driving you to New York. Perfect job. So we went to New York, and here was the search committee talking to me about the national CEO position. And because I knew they weren't serious, they were proving they were casting the widest net. When they said, if you took this job, what would you do? And I described the total transformation of the largest organization for girls and women in the world. Had a wonderful time. And when I came out, John said, how did it go? I said, I had the greatest time describing the quiet revolution, but they're not serious. A couple of days later, I get a call. We want you to come to New York. And because I had already described the kind of transformation that it required, everyone accepted. It was the most exuberant, marvelous period of great change.
So you became CEO of, it was the Girl Scouts of the USA, is that
Yes.
the correct title?
Yes.
And at that time, they weren't doing so well.
No.
The membership was down.
Membership was down, and when I asked how many members do we have from each ethnic group, we didn't know because they thought it would be discriminatory to ask a member about race, ethnicity. So we did a wonderful study, and we found that our people wanted to be more racially diverse, but they were, quote, waiting for them to come in. And we researched the people in all of those groups. Well, they wanted us, but they didn't know how to access. We invested in our people, and we moved out, and in a very short time, more than tripled racial, ethnic representation.
And one way you did that was you revised your handbooks, which is the Bible of any Girl Scout, to reflect more ethnic communities,
Yes.
correct?
We threw out the old handbooks that were 12 years old, with leading educators developed a richly exciting contemporary program, and it's a period of great excitement, and because the books were highly contemporary, the illustrations, we said, when any little girl looks, or a young woman looks in her handbook, she must be able to find herself. And she could.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an exuberant time.
And so membership went up to what, how many?
When I left, 3.2, and we had
Million.
766,000 men and women. It was a wonderful time. And my last year of 13 was my most exuberant year.
And you changed the program, as you said, because, I mean, when I was a Girl Scout, as you said, a lot of the emphasis was on preparing girls to be wives and mothers and whatever, and you changed it to more of an emphasis on math, science, technology. And that, I assume, would have been reflected in the badges, the kinds of badges that girls could get. So we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back with more with Frances Hesselbein, president of the Frances Hesselbein Leadership Institute and author of My Life in Leadership.
John can hold his daughter. Marilyn can laugh with her sons. Raphael can play with his sister. Gregory can fly. None of this would have been possible without an organ donor. Keep life going. Sign up to be an organ donor today. You can register when you renew your driver's license or online at savelivesnewyork.org. The more New Yorkers who sign up, the more lives saved. One of them could be someone you love.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Frances Hesselbein, president of the Frances Hesselbein Leadership Institute and author of My Life in Leadership, which has just been published by the Josie Bass imprint of Wiley. Tell me about circular management, which was a concept you brought to the Girl Scouts.
Well, long ago, when I first began in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and I looked at the old hierarchical charts with everybody in little boxes, and we said up, down, top, bottom, superior, subordinate. Have you ever met a young person who couldn't wait to be a subordinate? So we pitched it, and with cups and saucers in my kitchen table, I developed what I called managing in a world that is round, circular management, where the leader is in the center, and in two concentric circles, we can put a whole board, a whole staff, and we move across the organization, not up and down. It worked wonderfully in that small town, small council. I carried it with me when I went to New York 6 years later, Girl Scouts of the USA, and we instituted circular management. It's on our website, Managing in a World That Is Round. And what it does is unleash the energies of your people.
I have to, as a former Brownie and a former Girl Scout, I have to tell you how much I hated selling the Girl Scout cookies. But you feel, you know, I sort of felt that, you know, wow, the Boy Scouts, they have money, you know, they're better endowed than we do. They do all these great things, but we have to, in order to have programs, we have to sell cookies. But you feel that it's the cookie sales are an invaluable part of Girl Scouting.
Well, it began when little girls and their mothers baked cookies in the kitchen, and then they went out and sold cookies to the neighbors. Well, it was so successful that then they began making it more formal, and pretty soon, millions and millions. I think last year I was there, it grossed $250 million, but the money stays in the troop with the council. And little girls learn marketing skills. They learn how to speak to the customer, make a promise, I will deliver the cookies later, and then they deliver them. It really was great fun, and best of all, the girls then can look at what they've earned and decide
How to spend the money.
To do with it. My troop sold lots of cookies. Here we are, big steel, big coal town, Western Pennsylvania. Where did they want to go with their money? Sail on the Joseph Conrad, an old whaling ship in Connecticut. So it opens wonderful doors.
Okay.
And it's theirs.
What's your favorite cookie?
Oh, Thin Mints, of course.
Everybody loves the Thin Mints. I mean,
Yes.
give me the trefoil, the shortbread trefoil any day. That's my cookie. I
I'm
bought a box recently.
I'm going to find a box for you.
No, please
somewhere.
do. One of the biggest challenges you faced as CEO of the Girl Scouts, however, was a cookie, I call it the cookie crisis of 1980, when somebody claimed, who had bought a box, claimed that they found a pen in it. And then suddenly 200 people were claiming they found pens, and, so you had this
Yes.
crisis. What did you learn from, how did you manage that, and what did you learn from that crisis?
We had a great PR firm, and I obeyed orders. They said, do not stop the cookie sale when everyone else was, and board members were saying, oh, you have to stop. I think by the time we reached the height of the pins, we had over 350 pins in cookies, and they told us, do not stop the sale. And then they had inspectors inspect all 3 factories, and the FDA, and there were 2 U.S. government agencies doing this, and at the end of 3 days, they came out and said, no, not in the manufacturer. It was in the place in the cookie after the person had the box of
It was a hoax. It was a hoax.
It was a hoax, and we obeyed orders even though it would seem logical. Stop the sale. So we encouraged our 365 councils. No, don't stop. Keep going.
So one of the lessons is get a good PR firm and do what they say.
And obey orders. The next year, membership and the cookie sale were down slightly, but the next year, because we obeyed orders, huge increase in cookie sales and membership.
Okay. Who was Peter Drucker, and what kind of impact has he had on your life and work?
Peter Drucker was the father of, he still is, the father of modern management, a professor at Claremont, but the author of many books and business schools all over the world study Peter Drucker. I had every book he ever wrote when I lived in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. When I was called to New York, I carried my Peter Drucker books and films with me because he made such sense. And I never expected to meet him, but we used all of his work, and his philosophy was the basis for our management system.
Now, managing for the mission, was that a Drucker concept?
Yes.
Tell us what that
was.
means.
It means mission is solely, why do we do what we do? Our reason for being. You don't manage for the what's, you manage for the why. So you manage for the mission. Then you manage for innovation. You don't just repeat the same old stuff. And Peter's definition of innovation is change that creates a new dimension of performance. Now, you might be upset by change, but a new dimension of performance would not upset you. So, manage for the mission, manage for innovation.
And it's all about how we can accomplish our goals better and better.
Better. And then we added manage for diversity because we knew if we were going to be relevant, the organization of the future, we had to be richly representative. To this day, that's one of my strongest beliefs. You manage for the mission, you manage for innovation, you manage for diversity, or you're part of the past, which means we're mission-focused, values-based, demographics-driven.
You believe we're facing a crisis of leadership in this country right now. What can be done to reverse this crisis?
In our country and in many parts of the world, because in our country right now we have the lowest level of trust and the highest level of cynicism in my whole lifetime. And so we reach out and we try to find the leaders who are focused on mission, on purpose, on what makes the country great, what will sustain the democracy is the big question. And so that's my question today, whether I'm looking at a potential leader, a leader in office, what are they doing to sustain the democracy?
What could the executives of Enron, say, have learned from the Girl Scouts?
You manage for the mission solely. Why do we do what we do? You say these are our values. They're not a plaque on a wall. You live them. And then you never, ever make an exception. You live those values. And everything you do
follows from that.
Sustains the democracy.
I was very impressed to learn that you currently hold a chair for the study of leadership at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, of all places. And I'm trying to picture you at 5'2".
No, 5.
5. That's right, 5
Only,
feet.
I cannot lie.
Working with these cadets and presumably with their officers. What kinds of interactions are you having with the people at West Point?
Well, I've completed
you've
my
completed
2 years.
Okay.
It was to be every other month, but I decided, and Colonel Kolditz, then, who heads that Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership, I said, instead of coming every other month and teaching and working with a class of cadets, I would like to bring a great thought leader with me. For example, I'd like to bring General Lloyd Austin III, Alan Mulally, the president of Ford, Jim Collins. Instead of saying, oh, we don't do that, fine. So it became almost every month because so many people wanted to go with me. So I would sit here with Alan Mulally or Jim Collins, knee to knee, 24 cadets, and we would begin. I would ask a question about leadership, and Alan or whoever was the great guest would respond, and then those cadets would grab it with the most marvelous questions, be so engaged. I finished last April. I never had a more exciting, exuberant time in my whole life than having that chair. And it's interesting, the person now in that chair, class of 51, chair for the study of leadership, happens to be one of the great thought leaders I
That you
brought
brought
with
in.
me.
Wow. Now, is there
Jim
any truth
Collins.
to the, is there any, what's the name?
Jim Collins.
Okay. Now, is there any truth to the rumor that I heard that you're being considered to head the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
No, because I'm not tall enough for the uniform. It's the only reason.
But otherwise, I'm sure you could do it.
But I'll tell you this, I have worked 19 years with every chief of staff, 5.
Really? Wow.
And I have never, ever had one disappointing moment. Whatever I'm called to do, I go.
Okay. Well, this has been fascinating. We're out of time, but I want to thank Frances Hesselbein for joining us today. My Life in Leadership, The Journey and Lessons Learned Along the Way, has just been published by the Josie Bass imprint of Wiley. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.